Hello everyone. Our group will be talking about the space race and how it relates to modern global society. To start off, the Cold War was essentially an arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, seeing who can build up the most amount of nuclear weapons, who can have the highest military might, who can have the greatest national power. In the early to late 50s, both nations thought if we can expand into space, then that's where the ultimate power is. And so in the end of the 1950s, both nations start developing space programs to launch themselves into space and ultimately try to go to the moon. So the space race lasted a little over a decade, ultimately ending up with America beating the Russians to the moon with the famous Apollo 11 landing, with Neil Armstrong being the first to walk on the moon. But during the space race, we noticed a massive increase in engineering, space technology, rocketry, all the above, and that is one of the key elements of how the space race pertains to modern global society. That we'll elaborate on later. But it's also important to notice that in 1969, we did not just stop space exploration. We continued on into the 70s and ultimately into the modern day.
Next, we will discuss the views of the United States on the space race. The presidents of the United States during this time served as leaders on how the U.S. viewed this topic. President Eisenhower sent a series of letters to the Soviet Union in attempts to foster cooperative space initiatives. He wanted to create a process to secure space for peaceful use. Ultimately, his direct attempts did not succeed, and the U.S. proceeded with the UN on a multinational initiative. In 1966, the UN created the Outer Space Treaty. This led to the United States joining the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Ultimately, the Soviet Union also reluctantly joined. Kennedy's presidency continued the U.S. belief that space should be an international and peaceful effort. In his inaugural address, he stated, "Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars."
This is how the Soviet Union felt when the US first landed on the moon through both Sergei Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev's son, and the press coverage. This first part is from the Scientific American, who conducted an interview with Sergei. Sergei felt that it was impossible for Russia to beat America in the space race due to poor leadership in decentralized competing space agencies, in contrast with the one strong US program. Nikita, his dad on the other hand, did not understand why Russia lost. This next part is from NASA's Astronautics and Aeronautics 1969 book, which was on press coverage in Russia of this event. In Russia, this news was not widely broadcasted like the Soviet space expeditions, but not hidden away from the public. Soviet TV first showed the landing on July 24th and talked about it in the newspaper, as shown here, as early as July 22nd.
The International Space Station started as a cooperation between 5 different space agencies that represented 15 different countries. The construction of the station began in 1998, and it has been continuously occupied for the last 16 years by various spacefaring nations. The feats of building and maintaining a station this large and complex could only be accomplished through the tight cooperation of different nations. Jeffrey Kluger states that once astronauts get to the ISS, terrestrial politics mean nothing at all. They are relying on the cooperation of a few close crewmates to keep them alive and safe as they race through low Earth orbit. The ISS is therefore a great example of both globalization and the move towards globality, in that it represents the cooperation of nations for a common goal and the growth of humanity, and not just a singular nation or people. Military, private, and commercial satellites have the ability to take images from all over the world. Individual privacy and security is challenged by the ever-growing fleet of satellites in orbit. Satellites will only become more prevalent in the future, and whether or not they should be allowed to spy is a heatedly debated topic. The 1967 United Nations Outer Space Treaty stated that space could be used for only exclusively peaceful purposes. Peters T. says that in the modern day, this has held nearly no credibility. The only force preventing the militarization of space are bilateral agreements. Will space be militarized, and is it ethical to use the celestial space around Earth? These are questions that the world will have to answer.
Therefore, the space race and the space age ultimately heavily pertain to global society. Over 40 nations have sent astronauts and satellites into space as of 2015, one starting with 2 superpowers seeing who can get to the moon first. Currently, there is a conglomerate of different nations owning the space above the Earth. According to an article on NASA's webpage, the space race gave us a massive increase in technology, communication, and engineering. Today, nations, governments, militaries, businesses, and civilians use these technologies, such as TV, phone, internet, satellite imagery, to do business, to conduct military operations, to have diplomatic relations with other nations. They use these things as a result of the technology that was birthed from the space race.